Hello, this is Mike, and welcome to another episode of Urban Legends and Mythology. Today, we are doing something a little different. For one, I don't have a beer in my hand right now. I am actually drinking a delicious, refreshing Coca Cola. And no, this isn't an ad. I haven't sold out. Coca Cola doesn't even know I exist. But if they wanted to give me money, they know where to find me. But the reason I'm drinking a Coca-Cola today is because, if you couldn't tell from the title, today we are discussing food myths. There are thousands upon thousands of urban legends and myths revolving around food, that very substance that we place into our bodies. Because the simple fact of the matter is, for as long as we have had some kind of centralized, industrialized food distribution industry, we really don't know what we are putting in our bodies anymore, especially in our modern age where we are so disconnected from the source that we think food just simply comes from the supermarket. So today, let's explore some of these myths, some of these urban legends surrounding our food, because some of them have been around for an extremely long time. And let's see if we can discern any truth behind these legends. So, like always, we're gonna start right at the beginning. So have you ever eaten some kind of processed meat? For example, a hot dog or Spam or potted meat, any kind of meat that comes into a can. And furthermore, have you ever eaten it and thought to yourself, what actually is this that I'm eating? I'm sure at some point in our lives we have all had that feeling or thought that while eating some kind of, let's just say, mystery meat. Well, this isn't a new phenomenon. Ever since human civilization first started, there had always been rumors that what you're eating, what you're being served, isn't actually what you're told that you're being served. A lot of the time you think you may be being served chicken or beef. However, in fact, it is rat or dog. A lot of places have and still to this day get in trouble for passing off horse meat as ground beef. Well, this idea goes back as far as the Roman Empire and possibly even further, anywhere where you find a hot food stall, especially anywhere where you would buy some kind of like sausage or mystery meat. You would generally hear people joking around the food stalls saying, "Oh, you're gonna charge me that much for a bunch of cat meat and hooves." And we can assume for the most part these were just snide, tongue-in-cheek jokes. They weren't really meant to be taken seriously. There were times, usually during times of drought or high prices of food, in which you would see some unscrupulous individuals adding, let's just say, fillers to their food. And by fillers, I can mean just anything and everything you can think of, including things like sawdust. Because remember, pre-20th century, there's no real regulation in the food industry. I mean, this was a time in human history where you could cook up a rat and put it in a meat pie and tell them it's chicken, and if they're hungry enough and desperate enough, they'll eat it. And these bad actors and these rumors would persist to the point where a lot of places like England, for example, had to institute really strict laws when it came to bread, because people were literally taking stuff like sawdust and dirt or whatever, putting it in their bread when they were making bread, and use that as like a filler material so they could produce more bread. And England really had to crack down on that. They would actually impose some very harsh fines on unscrupulous bakers who did that. However, the classic urban legend that usually pops up surrounding this subject is the legend of the infamous meat pies, which grew out of the infamous urban legend of Sweeney Todd and Mrs. Lovett and her infamous meat pies. Now, if you want to hear that legend, I did go into detail on it a couple episodes ago. It's the Spring-Heeled Jack Sweeney Todd episode, so be sure to check that out. It's very awesome. But for anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, essentially the urban legend goes that Sweeney Todd was this barber. He was murdering his patrons, and Mrs. Lovett, she owned a nearby pie shop, and she would take the victims and grind them up and serve them in her meat pies. And this is kind of a trope in the meat industry that still gets talked about till this day. I mean, even the pilot episode of Bob's Burgers is essentially a parody of that. And that trope of cannibalism actually does exist in the real modern world. And anybody who has ever heard of the infamous serial killer Robert Pickton knows exactly where I'm going with this. Now, Robert Pickton, he's actually one of Canada's most prolific serial killers, but his life story is actually very fascinating. He actually grew up in a very wealthy family on a pig farm. However, despite always having access to lots of money, they lived in absolute squalor on this farm. The farm was described as just a few shacks scattered across this land where the animals of the farm were pretty much free to roam in and out of wherever they wanted. And he had the typical abusive childhood. He had nightmarish parents from hell who abused him and treated him as a slave on his own farm. He was bullied in school. He eventually drops out at the age of like 14 to apprentice in his father's butcher shop, where he does become a very skilled and talented butcher. And in the 90s, he would go on to inherit the family farm along with millions of dollars, but he would still remain living in absolute squalor. They said he never really caught on to the whole hygiene thing. And while essentially running this successful pork products empire, he was also carousing with the Hells Angels, throwing these wild parties out on the farm, and carousing with prostitutes. And it grew this reputation as a wild, kind of dangerous place where you probably shouldn't go to, but the allure of a place to crash and some free alcohol and some free drugs was too much for some of these sex workers to resist. And I apologize if it sounds like there's gunshots or something going on in the background. It is 9:29 p.m. on New Year's Eve 2023, and there's some like redneck or group of rednecks out there shooting off fireworks. But back to Pickton. So it was during these wild, crazy parties where he really started to hone his skill as a serial killer. Now, he would drive down to Vancouver to like the absolute worst parts of Vancouver where he knew all the homeless people and like the prostitutes and stuff were hanging out. You know, it was essentially Vancouver's Skid Row. And he'd ride up in his truck or his van or whatever. He'd pick up these prostitutes, offer them money, offer them free drinks, offer them, you know, a great party to come out to what was called Piggy Palace at the time. And generally, he'd always get somebody to at least come back with him. Now, to be honest, he didn't murder everybody who went out there. There were people who said that they would go out there numerous times, but there was an unfortunate swath of women who did end up going out to that farm, and they were subsequently murdered by Pickton. Some estimates say that it was as high as maybe 50 women. Women he would murder, some he would feed to the hogs, some whom he would serve to his party guests as his special meat. And some of it is alleged to have ended up in supermarkets and on dinner tables across British Columbia. It was literally to the point where they had to issue like a public warning to not consume any of the pork products coming from Pickton Farms. I mean, when you think about it, this guy was a real-life Sweeney Todd. Luckily, though, he was eventually caught and he will spend the rest of his life in prison. So now that's one of the more dark food-related stories out there that kind of drifts in and out of urban legend concerning our foods. It's kind of a sad case of real life imitating art. But that is one of the dominant food-related urban legends out there, that there could be humans in our food. Let's not forget Soylent Green is made of people. But a lot of the rumor around this myth actually comes from the 1906 novel The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And this novel is essentially an expose of corruption in the meatpacking industry, wage slavery, business corruption, all stuff. His idea was to advance socialism in the United States. But that really flew over a lot of people's heads. What really intrigued the public was more in tune to the health code violations that were going on, as well as the unsanitary practices that were going on in the meat industry at the time. It actually led to the Meat Inspection Act which was essentially a crackdown on the whole meat processing industry. It now ensured that meat and meat products were slaughtered and processed under strictly regulated sanitary conditions, that meat had to be labeled properly and must endorse strict inspections. It even goes as far as telling you like what can be labeled as a certain type of meat and what cannot. So let's move away from some of the more dark stuff. I kind of wanted to cover the whole meat industry in those first few minutes because that's pretty much the darkest part of it. Let's get into some more fun kind of urban legends and myths surrounding our food that we all have kind of ascribed to or joked about or actually believed in our lives. So let's get into a food that has sparked its own swath of urban legends: Spam. What is it? Where did it come from? Why do Hawaiians put it on everything? And why is there an entire subsection of my email dedicated to it? Spam is the ultimate mystery meat. It's literally meat in a can. It is this rectangular amorphous blob of meat that's heavily salted, that comes in that iconic can that literally does not need to be refrigerated. And while it is possible to eat it straight out of the can cold, because it is technically edible, it is highly recommended that you cook it or cut it up and fry it simply for taste purposes. Now, I admit I actually enjoy Spam. I came from a working class hillbilly family, and we would always have it with, various meals. Hell, I was at my dad's house last night and he fried up some to make a sandwich. It's actually really good. But what the hell is it? So the rumor, the myth around it is it's simply all the scrap cuts and the cheap meat that doesn't really sell in the stores, and it's all kind of emulsified together into this brick of meat. And the company does this in order to create a low-cost meat product that they can sell to the masses and make money off of what would otherwise be scrap trash material. But the truth is that's not really what it is at all. Spam is a combination of ham and pork shoulder, and a lot of people think pork shoulder is just a generic term for trash meat. Well, that isn't actually true. Pork shoulder is also known as Boston butt. It's a cut of meat right towards the end of the tenderloin. It's essentially an extension of the loin cut and can be used in place of the loin. It's generally a little more fatty, and it's not really the most popular or well-known cut out there. And that's essentially it. It's ham, pork shoulder, modified potato starch, which is used as a binder, salt, water, sugar, and sodium nitrate, which is a preservative. That's all there is in Spam. So, okay, we got that. So why did they create it? Why does it exist? And the rumor is actually true. It grew out of the Great Depression. It was actually introduced in 1937 as a way to increase the sale of pork shoulder, which wasn't a very popular cut of pork. You gotta remember, this is the tail end of the Great Depression, and this is a time in an era where you didn't really want to waste food. So if you had a food product out there, then you wanted to sell it and not see it go to waste, and it would be marketed to like housewives as an easier, cheaper alternative to a lot of the pork products that were out there on the market. However, it really shot into popularity during World War II, mostly due to the fact that it's a canned meat that doesn't need to be refrigerated, so it can be preserved for a long time, especially in these islands amongst the South Pacific. So it starts showing up in the rations of frontline soldiers who wanted, fresh meat on the front lines. An army always marches on its stomach. And it became marketed as a patriotic meal for the soldier on the go. And this is where it really takes off in Hawaii, because Hawaii was really the big Western Pacific staging ground for all the fighting that was going to go on in the Pacific. So a lot of soldiers and sailors and airmen were stationed there. So with that influx, it really starts to show up in the local diets, and that influx really inspired a lot of these dishes that we see in like Hawaii today, these Spam-based dishes. And it's like, go to any restaurant in Hawaii today, you can get Spam anything. You can get Spam sushi, you can get Spam on your pizza. It's crazy. And a quick side note, speaking of Hawaii, a few food myths there. Hawaiian pizza, you know, the infamous pizza with the ham and the pineapple, that's actually not a Hawaiian invention. That was actually created by a guy in Canada who, I don't know, I guess he was drunk one night, but yeah, that was actually invented in Canada. It's the Canadians who you have to blame for Hawaiian pizza. All you Hawaiian pizza haters out there, I don't know why y'all hate it. I think it's delicious, but then again, I really love pineapple. It's one of my favorite things to eat. And another myth, the pineapple itself is not indigenous to Hawaii. It's actually a South American plant that was brought to Hawaii in like the early 20th century. But I'm off on kind of a tangent now, so back to Spam. So post World War II, you know, Hormel, they're still creating Spam, and they're actually shipping it all over the world because like they would ship it to the Soviet Union in care packages and in these East Asian ravaged countries in the form of care packages as well. And it even shows up in the United Kingdom, and this is where it kind of gets the reputation as a low quality, low grade kind of trash food for poor people. Because during that post-war economic boom that happened in the Western world, we kind of gravitated away from that idea of eating these cheap canned meats. So it kind of fell out of popularity and kind of hit the back burner. It was just one of those things you saw in stores and you pick it up every once in a while, but you kind of had that idea that this is food that like poor people eat. And with the exception of, really, to be honest, Hawaii, where it remained super popular and super famous, hell, they even sell it at their Burger Kings and McDonald's, its reputation really started to slide. It was considered a cheap meat that trailer trash people eat. I mean, hell, I grew up in the 90s, and in the 90s, Spam was considered some low quality trash meat, but it was cheap, so we bought it and ate it. And to be honest, it kind of had that reputation up until about the early 2000s when things like social media and stuff came around, the internet became really prevalent, when it really started to rise again in popularity. And to be honest, I think a lot of that was pushed forward by my generation, us millennials who grew up either in poverty or in lower middle class, who have a nostalgic affinity towards it, and I think it's really fueled the growth in sales of that product in the last maybe 10 or 15 years. But myself personally, I think that idea, that myth around it, where it was made of the trash parts and it's this low grade meat and it's only for poor people, I think that was really just perpetuated by the fact that it was just simply really affordable and it sat in the back of probably every single pantry in the United States. But I am kind of glad that its reputation has kind of gone full circle, because it's one of those things where you don't really think about it, but could you imagine what would happen if they said they were discontinuing it? It would be like when they discontinued the Twinkie. There'd probably be riots, especially considering it's become such a cultural icon. I mean, it started becoming a cultural icon in the 70s with that infamous Monty Python sketch where they're in that little restaurant and the whole menu is nothing but Spam. And hell, that sketch even led to the word being borrowed as a way to describe unsolicited, unwanted emails. Speaking of those emails, I wonder what's going on with that Nigerian prince. I don't think anybody's ever heard back from him. But yeah, that's kind of the story of Spam. It's become one of the most successful products in American history. It's right up there with Coca Cola and Levi jeans. And speaking of Coca Cola, that's where I want to go to now, because that company has more myths and urban legends surrounding it than almost any other company on the planet. It is a treasure trove for conspiracy theorists. Now, we all know Coca Cola. You would be hard pressed to find people on this planet who don't know what Coca Cola is. It is everywhere. It is ubiquitous. It is as American as, like I said, Levi jeans or apple pie or Spam or baseball or American football. It is the drink. But it wasn't always America's favored drink. It did start out kind of in this melange of patent medicines. And that's where the first few myths around the drink come from. So the story starts in the 1880s with John Pemberton. He was this pharmacist, and he was this former Confederate colonel from Atlanta who was addicted to morphine. Like many soldiers from the Civil War who had been wounded in battle, they were addicted to morphine. And he set out to kind of find a way to cure himself and his fellow wounded vets of this affliction, this morphine addiction. So he starts out on this quest to essentially create this kind of patent medicine, and he was inspired by a French drink called Vin Mariani. Now, Vin Mariani used wine and coca leaves, and it was the ethanol in the wine that would kind of release traces of cocaine from the coca leaves and provide this stimulant, which would, per their advertisements, restore vitality, restore energy and health, blah blah blah. And in the late 19th century, cocaine was seen as this new wonder drug which could possibly cure people of their morphine addiction, amongst 1,000 other claims which were out there floating around at the time. I mean, anybody who knows basically anything about cocaine knows that even in small doses it can be a painkiller and it can give you massive amounts of energy. So taking inspiration from this, Pemberton essentially creates Pemberton's French wine coca, which was essentially a French wine mixed with the cola nut, coca, and damania. And of course, with the mixture of the ethylene and the coca creates coca-ethylene, which is the main stimulant in this product. And to be honest, it was somewhat of a success. This is the precursor of Coca Cola. However, it was as early as 1886 when Atlanta and Fulton County passed a prohibition legislation on alcohol, where he was forced to take the alcohol out, and he renamed it and marketed it as Coca-Cola, the temperance drink. And instead of wine, this would be mixed with carbonated water and be sold at soda fountains across pharmacies in Atlanta and then throughout other states. However, at this early age, it was still a patent medicine made by this pharmacist, and up until Pemberton died, it was still a patent medicine made by a pharmacist. And that's where the first kind of urban legend about Coca-Cola comes from, that Coca-Cola had cocaine in it, and to some extent it did. It had coca-ethylene, which is derived from the coca leaf. Now, Pemberton's original recipe called for 5 ounces of coca leaf per gallon of syrup, which is approximately something like 37 grams per liter. However, by 1891, it only contained about 1/10 of that amount, because even as early as the 1890s, people were already understanding that cocaine was just as addictive as heroin, it was just as addictive as morphine. So they started tapering down the amount of the stimulant that was in Coca-Cola. And up until 1903, Coca-Cola themselves estimated there was probably about 9 milligrams of cocaine per glass of Coca-Cola. And for comparison, for those wondering out there, a typical line of cocaine is 50 to 75 milligrams. So already throughout the 1890s up to 1903, we're talking minuscule amounts. And to taper it down even more, after 1904, instead of using fresh coca leaves in the Coca-Cola recipe, they started using spent leaves. Now, these are leaves that had already gone through the cocaine extraction process. However, they may have had some residual cocaine still in them. And since 1929, they have exclusively used a cocaine-free coca leaf extract, and that coca leaf extract is actually prepared at a plant in Maywood, New Jersey. It's the only manufacturing plant authorized by the federal government to import and process coca leaves, which it obtains from Peru and Bolivia. So that company, it extracts the cocaine from the coca leaves, and then it sells that cocaine to a company called Mallinckrodt, which is the only company in the United States licensed to purify cocaine for medical use. So while Coca-Cola may still exist in the cocaine adjacent world, there actually hasn't been any traces of cocaine in Coca-Cola since 1929. So essentially anybody living today who has ever had one of these cocaine-laced Coca-Colas is in their 90s. And let's be honest, nobody was actually getting addicted to Coca-Cola from the cocaine that was in it. People were getting addicted to it because of the sugar. Sugar is the most addictive substance on the planet. That's why people are still addicted to soda to this very day. They need that sugar. But speaking of sugar, that kind of leads us to our next little topic, which spawned a series of other subsequent myths, New Coke. So New Coke was the biggest marketing failure and success in Coca Cola's history. So it all started in the 1970s when Pepsi was looking for a way to boost its market share. So Pepsi introduced the Pepsi Challenge, which was a blind taste test between Coke and Pepsi, which one tasted better. And over again, Pepsi was the preferred choice. And this is just simply because Pepsi is more sugary tasting. And humans being humans, we just naturally love sugar. And as a result of this infamous Pepsi Challenge, Coca-Cola had realized that it was starting to lose its market share to Pepsi, diet sodas, and other like fruit drinks which were on the market that it was competing with. And in order to make up for this lost revenue, they launched this new ad campaign, and they decide that they're going to change the formula of Coca-Cola. So in the 1980s, they go into the labs and they create these new formulas, and then they test them with focus groups, and they actually test really high and really well with these new focus groups. And they come out of this thing and they have a new hit on the market, and they're going to make billions off of this, and this is going to be the new future of Coke. It's going to be awesome. However, Coca-Cola underestimated the average consumer. The average consumer of Coca-Cola knows about Coca-Cola from the cradle to the grave. They know that taste. They know that formula. I can say Coca-Cola right now and you instantly know what it tastes like. It's that sweet, kind of carbolic acid, acrid taste. And while it might not be the best tasting drink out there, it actually comes in dead last in a lot of blind taste tests. It is so familiar to us and so iconic and so American that changing it is tantamount to blasphemy. And this is exactly what happened when Coke came out with New Coke in the middle of 1985. People were furious. For like the first 3 months after launch, people got this tirade of like angry letters, threatening them and saying, how can you possibly do this to Coca-Cola? You guys are sick. What is wrong with you? And this went on for months. People were literally protesting, saying, bring back the old formula. And they were literally saying things like, if you do not bring back that original formula, that original taste, you are going to lose a customer for life. And this really threw a wrench into Coca-Cola's infamous cradle to the grave advertising scheme. And that's kind of the whole misstep that Coca-Cola took. They focused so much on changing the taste that they forgot that it's not the taste that they ever sold you on. It's that feeling, it's that lifestyle, it's that American dream. It is an American who drinks a Coke. It's that feeling of cracking open a nice cold bottle of a familiar drink after a hard work day. It's that iconic feeling of Santa Claus leaving the presents under the tree and having a nice bottle of Coke, and that nostalgia of your childhood. That's what the advertisers always tried to sell you on, and now they're trying to sell you on its taste, and they took the familiar taste and they changed it to something else. Well, that does not create happy customers. In fact, it got so bad that only 3 months after the launch of New Coke, they had to reintroduce the classic formula, Coca-Cola Classic Original Taste, into stores. And even though it always seems to come in somewhere near the bottom on blind taste tests, the fact of the matter is we actually don't care about the taste. We care about preserving it as is for as long as we can, because that is what is most important to us, the consumer. Now, in the years after the infamous New Coke fiasco, a lot of people came out stating that this was all an elaborate marketing scheme to launch a product that would be a dud and then re-release the old formula and make billions. And while that is exactly what happened, it was never a clever marketing scheme. Even their own executives said that They were in fact that dumb, in the sense that they truly did believe in this new formula. They thought it was going to be the future of Coke. And essentially in the same breath, they also said, we would never be clever enough to come up with a marketing scheme like that. But it's like everybody always says, hindsight is 2020, because if in 1984 they had had that idea for that kind of ad campaign, it would have been the most successful and greatest ad campaign of all time. But in fact, it was a massive flop that cost the company a ton of time and effort and resources. However, New Coke wasn't the only soda out there on the market created by the Coca Cola company to have its own rumors and urban legends surrounding it. Let me tell you about something from my youth when I was in junior high, early high school. Let me tell you about Surge. Now, Surge was a citrus-based soda that was put on the market to compete with Mountain Dew. And this was the era of like extreme ad campaigns. They were like pairing up like Mountain Dew and Surge with like basketball players and skateboarders and stuff, associating it with extreme sports. And I remember all these urban lists and urban legends surrounding it. It was supposed to be like the most extreme caffeinated drink on the planet, which was a myth. One myth that was popular in my 8th grade class was if you drank 2 of them, one after another, your heart would explode. And another myth said that if you drank too much of it, it would like nuke your sperm count. You would never have kids. And I always wondered if some of these rumors or urban legends surrounding it are what led to its discontinuation, but no. What actually led to its discontinuation was it just could not compete with Mountain Dew. And it makes sense because a couple years ago when they re-released it in like Burger Kings and stuff, I actually tried it and it did not taste like how I remembered it. It just didn't really have a great taste. I just only bought it because I was a skateboarder back in those days and it was being advertised as being associated with extreme sports. But that's really all there is to say about Surge. It was a mediocre drink that was kind of an early precursor to what would become Volt and all those energy drinks that came afterwards. You know, drinks like Rockstar and Monster Energy Drink and Red Bull. It gives you wings, and taurine is made of bull balls. To be honest, not a whole lot to say about energy drinks. They don't really give you energy. They give you a sugar and caffeine rush, and then you crash in 3 hours and then you just crave another one. To be honest, I've been lucky in life. I mostly stayed away from energy drinks. Now, when Rockstar energy drinks first came out, I used to drink those, and then they kind of like disappeared from the market. Well, they didn't really disappear, but they were harder to find in the market, so I stopped drinking them. And to be honest, I don't really care much for Monster Energy Drink, except for that original green kind of apple one. That one's okay. Once in a while, like maybe once a year, I might have one of those. But all in all, I generally try to stay away from them, mostly because they're just probably one of the least healthy things on the planet, and I don't really need to be putting that in my body. But speaking of unhealthy things that we should probably never be putting in our body, let's move on to our next icon, which has sprung a whole lot of urban legends in itself. Let's move into the fast food industry, particularly McDonald's. Good old iconic Mickey D's, McDonald's, Macca's for my listeners in Australia. The maker of mediocre, extremely addictive food, and one of the biggest real estate holders on the planet, the infamous McDonald's. And that second part is actually true. McDonald's is actually one of the largest real estate holders on the planet because McDonald's actually doesn't make its money from selling hamburgers. It makes its money from leasing properties to franchisees. So the franchisees, they buy a McDonald's, they take on all the risk, they run the day-to-day operations, and they have to maintain McDonald's standard, which is essentially the standard of uniformity and certain cleanliness procedures and whatnot. And any McDonald's that fails to live up to those standards, the franchisee loses their lease and they just go on to the next franchisee. And it's actually a very clever business model that this banker dude that Ray Kroc knew came up with. And it ensures quality control across all restaurants, and it is just a profit machine. You don't have to worry so much about about hamburger sales when you're making money hand over fist from leases. But I'm getting off onto a tangent, so what are some of the myths, the urban legends surrounding McDonald's? Well, we got some really good ones for you. Let's start with pink slime. So pink slime really went viral in the early 2000s. It's this emulsified meat product, which is basically chicken. So you take a chicken, you run it through a sieve, feathers and guts and bones and all, and it comes out on the other end as this pink goo. And that pink goo goes on to live in your chicken nuggets and your McChickens and whatever other chicken products they serve at McDonald's. I don't really know. To be honest, I've only been to McDonald's like twice in the last year. I just can't justify those rising prices. But yeah, it was believed for years that McDonald's was using this pink slime substance in order to create their nuggets and their chicken products. And to some extent it was true, because McDonald's actually had to come out and dispel this myth somewhat. They said, yes, while we use this mechanically separated chicken in our products, we are gradually phasing it out. However, it's not just a chicken pushed through a sieve. There are no guts or eyeballs or anything like that in it. And speaking of their chicken products, the infamous, quote, secret menu item, the McGangbang, that isn't actually a secret menu item. Every instance I have ever seen of anybody ever buying that sandwich is just an instance of a guy buying a McChicken and a double cheeseburger and building it himself. And for the most part, McDonald's doesn't really have a secret menu. You can pretty much buy whatever you want and make up whatever combination you want. I mean, it's not like you walk into a Wendy's and ask for a Frosty with fries already in it. No, you buy them separately and then you dip your fries in it, and it's freaking awesome. Except, don't go trying to buy any ice cream products from McDonald's. Their ice cream machine is always down or broken or out for cleaning. And that's not an urban legend, that's just a fact. Ice cream machines are a tedious bitch to clean. It takes a very long time. And I know this from my own experience. Way back in the day, back when I was 18, 19, I worked as a busboy in a restaurant that had an ice cream machine. And it was the worst, most headache problem machine that ever existed on the planet. It's one of those things that you avoid working on or working with at all costs. So when they tell you the ice cream machine is down at McDonald's, yeah, it's pretty much always down because nobody wants to deal with those finicky damn things. But I'm off on another tangent now, so let's get back into some classic urban legends. So the next one is the myth or legend or actual fact of the Enlist cheeseburger. And this is all thanks to preservatives. So preservative technology in food has gotten to the point in this country where you can keep something in the right conditions preserved for years upon years. That's why something like a McDonald's cheeseburger or box of chicken nuggets, if preserved in the right conditions, will never spoil and never deteriorate. Hell, it won't even grow mold. It will look the same at year 10 as it did on day 1. Now, while the taste might be a little funky, I mean, if you dared to actually even try to eat it, it probably after 10 years wouldn't be nutritious at all, and that's saying a lot considering the things aren't nutritious in the first place. But it does stay preserved, and that is thanks to our food preservative technology. It's really an amazing technology, but it does lead to that rumor of the endless cheeseburger. Can we sit a cheeseburger in the right conditions in something that will last 1,000 years? I'm sure we can. And to be honest, all this talk about McDonald's, it's actually making me crave a double cheeseburger and some chicken nuggets right now. And you know why that is? It's because McDonald's is extremely addictive. Even though it is only about as nutritious as reconstituted cardboard, and even though after eating it you feel slightly sick and then an hour later you're hungry again, it is very addictive. And why is this? Well, I can tell you it has nothing to do with those rumors that came out in the 80s and 90s during the height of the crack and heroin epidemics, that they were lacing cheeseburgers with crack and heroin to get people addicted. It's actually in fact due to two things: sugar, which is the most addictive thing on the planet, and monosodium glutamate, MSG, that delicious thing that just makes all food taste good. Now, obviously, there's sugar in just about everything that you can get at McDonald's. Hell, even the bread. American bread is super sugary. It's almost like cake. It's kind of disgusting, to be honest, which is why I like to make my own bread. But sugar is necessary because it has addictive qualities, just like MSG. MSG is that thing we put in food to make food taste good, and it is believed to have some addictive qualities to it. Now, to be honest, they're not insidiously putting this stuff in our food to keep us addictive. They have plenty of advertising that keeps us addicted, but it is best that you know what is going into your food when you're eating it, which is why they are required to give you the ingredients of their foods. It's listed on their websites and it's listed on their menus if you ask for them. And this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to McDonald's related myths. These rabbit holes can get deep, and I admit some of them get a little unhinged, like the myth that McDonald's perpetuates childhood obesity in order to create health disorders in children so they can continue raising donations for the Ronald McDonald House. That one may be a little out there and unhinged, but there are legends out there that are grounded in reality, like the legends of people getting injured with deep fat fryers, or the legend of people finding like chicken beaks and feet and stuff in their chicken products. Now, it happens further up the chain in the manufacturing and processing of the chickens, but you fail one quality control and a chicken beak ends up in a box of chicken nuggets, and all of a sudden you got an urban legend on your hands. And let's stick with chickens, but let's move to a different franchise. Let's move to KFC. So there are rumors that KFC actually had to rebrand from Kentucky Fried Chicken because they could no longer legally advertise their products as chicken products since they weren't actually made from chickens anymore. So on a genetic level up the chain, they were trying to genetically engineer these chickens in this laboratory, and these chickens were headless 15-pound birds with 8 legs and 8 wings, and they were already hatching out of the eggs with those 11 essential herbs and spices. Essentially, they created headless spider chickens. Now, while I'm sure that has showed up in some kind of B horror movie somewhere, I'm looking at you, Asylum Films. The actual reality is that is not true at all. And why is that not true? It's simply because of the USDA. The USDA routinely goes around all these chicken farms and inspects them and finds them for every little tiny thing. They're like the OSHA of the food industry. And while we can genetically modify chickens through selective breeding and whatnot in order to have larger breasts, larger legs, whatever, it's not as insidious as a practice as one would have you believe. I mean, 90% of it is just selective breeding. But KFC actually really has very strict standards on the types of chickens that they choose to butcher. They have to meet certain quality control criteria, and if they don't meet that criteria, they're not sold to, I don't know, whoever supplies KFC with their chickens. Which I think we can crush the rumor right here and now of Spider Chicken. While he may have existed in some B horror film possibly created by Asylum, I doubt any chicken breeding facility would ever risk creating such a monstrosity just to boost profits when they can literally just have their chickens lay more eggs. Oh, and if Spider Chicken hasn't become a thing in horror films, then we or somebody needs to actually make that into a B horror movie film. I would watch that. That sounds like it would be freaking awesome. But while we're on this subject of genetically modified food, let's go ahead and run with that because I want to dispel a lot of myths about GMOs that are out there that is really damaging to our food industry. So a lot of people out there will be like, I'll never eat genetically modified food. They're splicing DNA of this and that and blah, blah, blah. And GMOs are banned in various countries, and I don't know why the USA allows it to happen and all this stuff. Well, you know what? That's all just a bunch of garbage. And I'll tell you why. Because you have been eating genetically modified foods all your life. You just haven't realized it. For example, every meat product you have ever eaten in your life has come from a genetically modified organism because of two things: domestication and selective breeding. Cows and pigs have been selectively bred since the dawn of civilization to be bigger and bigger with each successive generation. There's literally an entire science behind it called animal husbandry. You get the best specimens to create the best offspring to create the best meat. Another thing, corn, which is a staple crop in the United States and around most of the world, does not exist in the wild. Corn derives from a weed known as teosintine, and that weed has been selectively bred with other weeds every season for over 12,000 years in order to create the iconic classic corn that we grow here in America every day. Lemons don't exist in the wild. They are actually a crossbreed of citron and sour oranges. The yeast that creates various beers and wines, those are selectively created and maintained in order to maintain certain standards of industry. Genetically modified foods aren't something that came onto the scene because of Dow Chemical or DuPont or whatever that other one is I can't remember the name of right now. Genetically modified foods go back to the pre-dawn of history. Now, I know what a lot of people are probably thinking. They're thinking, well, what about pesticides and insecticides and all this stuff that essentially is poison? And yes, I will agree. We literally spray our crops with poison. And I agree, there probably are better techniques out there that we could use in industrial farming, more natural techniques that can rid our crops of pests. I would love that. But just because your crops aren't being sprayed with poison doesn't mean that they're not genetically altered. They have already been genetically altered over millions of their little generations. As I said, anything that doesn't naturally exist in an environment has probably been genetically modified or will be genetically modified through selective breeding. Hell, we humans are genetically modified because we select who we breed with, and that has an impact on the future of the species. But I digress. I don't know. I always heard that about GMOs and pesticides, and the two get kind of intermingled when they talk about Monsanto. That's the one that I couldn't remember. And I think people tend to mix the two ideas up, and that does a lot of damage because it's kind of an insult to the farmers who go out there and work that land every day in order to provide us all with food. Let's not forget, in a hyper-industrialized society like our own, your farmers are your most important workers, so it's probably best not to piss them off or insult them. So the next time you're sitting there and you're ranting with your vegan friends or whatever about GMOs, maybe stop and think that you might just be talking about some kind of unnatural chemical synthetic pesticide, because GMOs exist literally everywhere. Ranting aside, I could probably go on for the rest of forever when it comes to these food-related myths. I've just barely scratched the surface. And there is enough source material for multiple episodes, so I think on that note, I will end it here. Once again, this is Mike. This is Urban Legends and Mythology. I do truly thank you for listening. And if you did enjoy the show, all I ask is that at bare minimum, you at least maybe tell a friend about an interesting new podcast that you are checking out. Feel free to share my links. I'm across pretty much every podcasting platform there is now, even ones I've never heard of that the RSS feed is just like showing up on out there in the world. And as always, if you want, you can always donate. That Spotify link is down in the description. Like it, rate it 5 stars, whatever. I know I say it all the time, but that stuff really does help out those charts and algorithms and all that stuff, because a niche topic like urban legends doesn't really rank very high in those charts, especially here in the United States. Also, this is the first episode of 2024. It'll be launching on January 3rd, I believe. And after this, there's only one more episode till the season 3 finale. That one is going to be epic and huge and awesome. I've already put a ton of work into it, and I have a lot more work to go, but that will be coming out soon. The show will go on a 3-week hiatus after that. We'll be back in February. In the meantime, I might throw in some filler stuff, some stupid stuff, some behind-the-scenes stuff, whatever. But I really hope to see the show really take off and really grow in the next year. I got a lot of growth out of this first year of doing it. I hope to see a lot more of that in the future, and it is all thanks to you guys. So once again, this is Mike. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.